Hello, viewers. Welcome back to another engaging episode of Manager's Mantra, where we connect with industry leaders who are shaping the future of business management. Today, we have with us Nishant Sood, Managing Director, Candi Solar India. Nishant holds over 15 years of experience, a decade of which has been in global finance, having worked across India, Asia Pacific, and Europe. He has advised startups in the renewable energy and education sectors on strategy and planning. An alumnus of IIM Calcutta and IIT Delhi, Nishant brings a strong blend of financial expertise, entrepreneurial experience, and strategic insight to the clean energy sector. Without waiting further, let's jump into this insightful discussion.
Hi Nishant, a very good morning and welcome to this new session of Manager's Mantra. We are really pleased to have you with us today and we are really looking forward to this interaction, hoping this to be a great one.
Thanks, Abhishek. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Nishant, let us start discussing the questions. My first question to you is India's rooftop solar market. It has grown significantly, but then we have seen that the adoption among the SMEs remain uneven. Now, what do you see as the biggest barriers preventing businesses from switching to solar at scale?
I would say there are certain sections of businesses, specifically, for example, the investment grade side, AA, AAA rated companies, where the penetration is significantly higher than the overall space. But when you start getting into the sort of medium-sized and smaller-sized companies, I feel like there is definitely a lot more scope in terms of penetration and increasing solar adoption in those companies. And I think where that has stemmed from is a multiple factors. Um, Firstly, I think the access to financing has been a little slow for these corporates. They haven't always had access to good, easy financing and at reasonable rates so that it makes solar viable for them. And it's only recently that that's sort of picking up a lot more in India, which means that they have been slightly behind the investment grade corporates in terms of getting into the solar space and then also getting comfortable with it. And then I feel like the second thing that's stopping a bit of it is um, normally we find that there is a lack of, let's say, specific role and accountability for someone to go solar in a company. The job of the company is to make profits. They're more sort of involved in terms of the day-to-day operations. So someone who's actually looking into solar, for example, a procurement manager or let's say an electrical head or a plant manager, solar falls a little behind in terms of their key areas to sort of focus on. Um, and hence, in some way, I feel like the decision making tends to be a little delayed. Um, and then the third factor, I guess, for decision making being a bit delayed is, I think, a lack of very cohesive framework for these companies to be able to compare different options, like the amount of savings they're making, because there's so many things out in the market. You can have a 10-year solar, you can have a 25-year solar, open access, rooftop. You're comparing it against grid, against merchant pricing as well. So for that, we've also sort of made an emphasis on something called the levelized cost of energy, which gives a good comparison point to people to compare different sources of energy and how commercially it makes sense for them. So I would say those three factors would be the ones that have stopped the adoption. But I think more and more we are seeing changes emerging in all three factors and companies going solar more and more because it makes absolute sense for them to go solar.
Of course. Thank you so much, Nishant. Nishant, therefore, do you think the economics of rooftop solar are changing for Indian businesses in a couple of years? Can you see that change, particularly the SMEs that we were discussing? And what factors do you think can make solar increasingly attractive from a business case perspective?
So I would say solar is already incredibly attractive for all these SMEs, for all these businesses. We're looking at anywhere from 40 to 50% savings versus their grid tariff, um, which would make make this a no-brainer decision in most cases. It's just that, like I said, the aforementioned factors wherein there is a very clear lack of accountability, or perhaps a lack of understanding in some sense as to how to look at different options. But I think already solar makes absolute sense for businesses. It's just about people understanding the value that it provides, the risks perhaps that are associated with it, which are very minimal if you do get a developer to come in and install solar and maintain solar. Um, but beyond that, I feel like the commercials absolutely make sense. And in the next couple of years, I feel like it's just more about people getting more comfortable, understanding uh, the value that it provides. And that I think will trigger more and more corporates going solar in the next few years.
Thank you, Nishant. Nishant, from your experience at Candi Solar, what are the key differences between selling solar as a technology and then positioning it as a long-term business solution?
It's quite a different thing. Like it's almost like let's say energy as a service versus selling a solar product. So Candy, for example, comes in as a long-term partner for these companies, right? So we will be with the company from anywhere from 10 to 25 years. And the revenues or the profits that we make are linked to the quality of the performance of the solar asset. So in a way, we're kind of partnering with the client as opposed to selling a system, which would mean a one-time sale, but not necessarily guaranteeing the performance of the system and not necessarily guaranteeing savings for the client. So what we end up doing is the end-to-end solution, starting from installation, financing, maintenance, and hence ensuring the savings that the client has. Uh, which means that the discussion is coming less as a vendor or a supplier perspective. It comes in more as a partner. Um, and that's the key difference that we want our clients and the corporates to understand, that we are coming in as partners, and someone who's selling in a solar system is actually coming in as a supplier. And there is a difference in that, because uh, the interests in the case of a supplier are not necessarily aligned in the long term. Whereas what we provide is alignment uh, commercially from a risk perspective, and it's a true partnership in that sense. So that's the kind of thing that we try and explain to the clients. And based on experience, then there's also a lot of trust factor in what we can provide and the long-term partnership that we can provide.
Nishant, the solar sector is becoming increasingly competitive. Now, beyond price, what do you think will differentiate successful renewable energy companies in the next phase of the market?
So I would say, and that's the thing we sort of double down on as well, right? So innovation has always been the frontier of what we've done at Candy. Whether it's innovating in terms of the products, the financial products that we provide, the contracts that we have, which are fairly simple to understand, whether it's in terms of accessing customers on a more automated basis, or or also automating and using AI and data for our operations and maintenance for our asset management services. So I feel like especially distributed solar, um, because of the way it's structured, it's not a bunch of assets. It's not like 150 megawatt asset just in a single spot. It's 150 single megawatt assets spread all over India. So I think we need to uh, distributed needs to have a different approach in terms of innovation to make sure that economies of scale do end up applying here. And access to customers, and especially access to SMEs. That's where I feel the innovation also does come into play. For example, like I already mentioned, different financial products, the contracts that we have. So we were the first company in the market to provide, let's say, a 10-year PPA. PPAs used to be 80 to 100 pages. And then when we came out with our contracts, they were about 20-25 pages long. Very simple, easy for the clients to understand. And that's what I think made SMEs and the smaller companies trust us, because they don't necessarily have a legal team to go through the contracts and negotiate and look into the legalese. Um, and then I would say another form of innovation, for example, that what we are doing is in terms of credit, because pricing different contracts for different clients is also something I feel is very, very important. Not all risks are the same. And that's also something that allows us to, let's say, customize a specific product for a specific client. So that's, I mean, in a nutshell, like I said, it's innovation. But there are nuances to that, and there are more details to that in which areas that people can innovate. But any sort of innovation is, I think, what will set people apart in this market.
Hmm. Nishant, your career path has been very interesting. You moved from investment banking into manufacturing and then subsequently into renewable energy. Now, what prompted this career transitions and what did each phase teach you about building a business?
Well, actually, I was talking to someone yesterday about this, so it's it's quite fresh in my mind as well, that conversation. So, um, yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I mean, I'm an engineer, MBA. So once I got out of IIM, this was 2008. The Lehman crisis had just hit. There were very few banks coming into campus. But I did end up getting it back into investment banking. So I did intern, for example, with Merrill, and then I got into Edelweiss, and then I worked with Morgan Stanley in Hong Kong for about 5 years. So I spent a fair bit of time in investment banking. But what I felt was I lacked I lacked a bit of um, I lacked a bit of context in the sense like of building something organically, like of building something of value and contributing something in the sense on multiple levels, whether it's in terms of building a business or whether it's sort of being able to contribute to the environment, which is also where solar and renewable is close to my heart, because it is contributing as we speak in more ways than one to society at large. And that's just the fact of building uh, an actual business which has value, which is providing sustenance, which is providing employment, and which is also in general, like I said, adding value to society, is something that was close to my heart, which I felt like in banking gives you a lot of tools to be able to strategize or channel your thoughts in a certain way. But I feel like in terms of contribution, I felt like this was closer to my heart, and this is more tangible, on the ground contribution that you can actually see, which worked well for me.
Great, Nishant. Thank you so much. Nishant, as an IIM Calcutta alumnus, what do you think an MBA genuinely prepares students for, and what does it not prepare them for?
Oh, that's quite interesting. I think I think for example, like most of the technical stuff that we ended up uh, studying was more or less the base for what we learn later on. So it's not like the things that you're learning on campus will directly be relevant in terms of what you're doing, right? Because that's that's very tough to replicate. The jobs now are extremely specific, extremely focused. So I would almost say that the basic level skills is what management or IMs tend to provide. Um, whether it's technical skills, if you're going into banking, being able to understand financials and commercials and things like that. Whether you're going into consulting, being able to understand a strategic picture, or whether if you're going into general management, sort of understanding a bit of the nuances of what goes into people, goes into people management. But at the end of the day, I feel like those are building blocks, and then experience is what teaches you how to deal with that situation. For example, when I moved from banking into manufacturing and into entrepreneurship, um, it was a completely different world for me. Banking teams are extremely small. We had a 4-person team. It's not like you're managing people as much. In banking, people are all also extremely driven. So, you don't need to push them or motivate them into doing something. But once you get into entrepreneurship, there is a much wider spread of people that you're working with. There are a lot of different management styles that you need to work with. Or, for example, if you're doing something technical, if you're doing like a technical analysis or you're coming up with a product, you can go extremely complicated, but then you have to see and gauge what the market is like, right? So you need to sort of make it simplistic enough. A complicated product which probably gives a little more savings or a little more value might be less attractive to clients than a simple product which might have slightly lesser commercial value. So just things like that, you only understand once you get to the ground. But those building blocks are the ones that you can use once you actually get to the ground and get feedback, and you're open to sort of understanding what's needed in the market and what's needed to make things work. And then you can use those building blocks whichever way you want. So that's how I see the MBA and how it sort of helped me.
Great, Nishant. A lot of practical thoughts and insights coming from there. Uh, Coming up to the last question of the session, Nishant, I'm loving this conversation, and this can go on for hour and hour, but then we are restricted by time. So, taking the last question of the session, many MBA students today are focused on consulting, investment banking, and large corporates. But then we are also talking about the Gen Z who are, more eager to get early success and make early money. They are not even shy of opening their own ventures, taking entrepreneurship. Now, what would you tell students who are considering entrepreneurship or sectors such as renewable energy instead of, joining consulting or large corporates?
So I would like that's again a journey that I went through when I went from banking to manufacturing, again manufacturing to renewable, right? So I feel like it's very important, and some of the steps I took obviously uh, were hasty in the past. Um, but I would suggest, like for people, for students, to sort of take their time and just understand what they really want. Um, in some cases, you assume that immediate money is going to make you happy. And it's all cliched stuff. People say enjoy the journey, not the final goal, and all of those things. But I feel like it is exceptionally true, right? You need to almost be true to yourself, be understand what you really want and what will actually make you happy. And then once you start progressing on that journey, uh, the journey itself will be satisfying. You won't need specific numbers, or you won't need specific targets to be able to make that journey worthwhile for you. And that's what I felt is most important. Like for example, for me, I realized that working in a huge corporate doesn't feel like I'm adding too much value. There's thousands of people doing more or less similar things that I'm doing. You also don't get the bigger picture. But for someone else, it might be that, they value the safety of a larger company, and then they prefer having a structure around that. So it varies from person to person. But I think like the first step needs to be just knowing yourself and knowing what will give you pleasure and what will give you happiness in terms of what you're doing. Um, and then I think the rest kind of falls into place because you also understand the risks you're taking. You understand that the chances of failure is higher if you're going into, let's say, entrepreneurship. But if you still, like I said, like, if you still like the journey, all of those risks, all of those chances of failures will be worth it. As opposed to, let's say you have a 10% chance of success, and you're only focused on the money in the short term, or you've only focused on the 10% success chances, then obviously there's a higher likelihood or a higher probability that you're not going to be happy after 5 years of doing something. So I would say that's the first key aspect for me. And then the second thing is like, you just have to be extremely flexible. Once you enter this journey, it's more about being able to react, respond, be flexible, use the tools, for example, like I was saying, that you have. Um, and tailor things, pivot when it's needed. And then the third thing would be like taking hard decisions when hard and quick decisions when they need to be taken. So I would say, yeah, those three things: be true to yourself, understand what you really want, be flexible, and then take those hard decisions.
Great, Nishant. I'm sure that will motivate, inspire a lot of students out there, a lot of the people aspiring to be, entrepreneurs and starting their own ventures. Thank you so much for taking out time and participating in this session. We are really hopeful to stay connected with you and have you again in any of the future sessions by BSmart Business Standard. Thank you, Nishant.
Great, great. Thanks a lot, Abhishek. It was a pleasure. Great conversation.
Take care. You have a great day.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on this episode of Manager's Mantra. Thank you, Nishant, for sharing your thoughts and providing career tips to the students. Be smart viewers, we hope you found this conversation helpful. Share your thoughts with us at bsmart.edit@bsmail.in. Follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram for more such insightful and inspiring content. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing.